Hi and welcome. My name is Phil Robson and I'm the Segment Manager for Hydrocarbons and Chemicals at Beca, and I'm also your host and MC for today's Techweek webinar, Amplifying a Sustainable Future. Thank you for your time, for joining this panel discussion. And firstly, a few quick housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, so will be available online. There's time at the end to answer your questions, so please put them in the Q&A part of the webinar. And so we'll do our best to get to most of those if the time allows, and there'll be a survey sent out immediately afterwards, and we'd appreciate your feedback. It's very valuable. So thanks for joining us again. And so sustainability and technology helping amplify us getting there. So today we're going to be talking in 3 horizons and what that means. But what are we talking about today? You're going to hear things from HoloLens, IoT, data analytics, plus also what we're going to do in the future, really to collaborate and amplify our future in eco parks and those types of co-located industries. So moving on. Let's introduce the panel.
Oops. Hi, my name is Mo. I'm a digital consultant at Beca, and my role is to help organizations find solutions for the problems using technology.
Hi, my name's Eleanor Grant, and I work in our industrial business line here at Beca, and I lead our sustainability services offering.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bacon, and I also work in the industrial section, working with our industrial clients to help them achieve their sustainability goals.
Thanks, great to have you guys here today. So as I mentioned before, we're going to be talking about technology in 3 horizons, helping amplify our sustainable future. What are we doing now with existing technology, which is really becoming business as usual? Where are we starting to move with some of the tools that are becoming available and how they're being used to actually help us become more sustainable? And then what does the future like if we really had the opportunity with technology to get after sustainability, and how that's really going to amplify us to help us get to that net carbon zero and our decarbonised future. I've been interested in technology for quite some time. I still recall back to the 90s when I was working overseas and I was running an equipment division for this construction company, and we had everything from cranes to welding equipment, but we also had 200 light vehicles, utes and cars, and they were being damaged. There was always brake issues and things like that. And I found a piece of equipment on the web back then. It was the mid-90s, so the web was just becoming available, and I found a piece of equipment called Drive Right, which was an aftermarket fit that you could put on the vehicles, and it gave us the total running time in the day, when the vehicle started and stopped, acceleration, deacceleration and G-force, as well as maximum speed and things like that. And so it was really useful when the vehicles came back for service. We could download this information and it would help us educate the users of the vehicles. And once we'd actually started to use it, we found that there were other benefits that we didn't realize when we started with the technology on what it was going to be. So we started to see reduction in fuel, we started to see reduction in people's working hours, and so it had all these other benefits that we didn't realize. And so that was what was really exciting for me about technology. But let's get on with what we're going to be talking about today. And the first up, about improving efficiency. Mo, what are some of the technology applications that are helping improve our sustainability today in this Horizon 1?
Well, frankly, Phil, most people might think of technology having a negative impact on the environment, whether it's due to emissions or e-waste. But what we've found is that you often get a positive sustainability impact at the end of a technology adoption, whether it's around increasing efficiency or reducing waste, even if this is something you haven't planned for early on in your project. So the example I've got today is actually a really common one, which is the smart water meters. If you live in a region in New Zealand that you've got volumetric pricing for water, and you have to pay your bill monthly, you would have surely realised a council staff member would come across to your property and record your meter readings manually on a piece of paper. And in the last few years, councils have been replacing those manual meters with smarter ones, using similar technology to what you mentioned earlier, Phil, just a little bit more advanced. So what they're replacing them with is smart meters that could wirelessly communicate back to the council the readings, identify any leaks that are happening so that the council can be more proactive and actually attend to them. And more importantly is actually having the council staff drive less to the sites and to go and read the meters, which obviously has a really positive impact in both the environment as well as the financial outcome of that. So this is just a great outcome for a relatively common technology.
Okay, thanks. And if we look at it in the industrial sector, what are we starting to, what are we seeing in the industrial sector at the moment, Mo?
A really trendy example in the industrial space is the use of, again, smart sensors, but this time smart sensors that produce enough data for you to train a model and train a machine learning model to learn how your equipment works. And by learning how it works and how they break, they're more likely to, or they actually send you alerts before a breakdown happens. On the face of it, sounds great, but it's, how's it related to sustainability? But we found actually is by adopting this, which we call predictive maintenance, you're reducing the amount of product waste as well as the health and safety exposure for your staff members by having a proactive maintenance schedule.
That's really great and good to see that is existing technology that is now here and we're rolling out and using with our clients today. But if we talk about today and we see what's happened and COVID's posed some real global challenges, how are we seeing technology being used to help overcome some of these challenges, Mo?
Well, as you know, Phil, with the New Zealand level 4 and the lockdown, many companies were pretty much stuck without having access to remote experts or having access to international experts, and with the border closure as well. So many organizations have been looking at technologies such as augmented reality or AR. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's the same technology that you would have seen if you've played Pokemon Go or tried the IKEA app for trying out furniture. And it lets you superimpose 3D objects in your field of view. That could be on a phone, on a tablet, or on a headset. But it also lets the other person actually see what you're seeing, draw on your field of vision, and being able to have an immersive experience. So what you're looking at the screen now is a photo of an actual project that we've done with one of our clients, where they started getting the remote experts dialing in remotely from the safety and comfort of their home using the headsets. And what they found is that now beyond COVID, it really solved their need, but they're now thinking about the amount of travel they're doing and whether they actually need to travel to sites, and if they could use something like this, which provides you that same immersive experience without having to actually travel. And to them, that's a great outcome, both from an environmental perspective as well as financially.
Thanks, Mo. And that's great to see and hear how technology is getting those additional benefits that I mentioned earlier. So that's really good to see, and it's great to hear what those opportunities are, and that there's people taking that right today and making that part of their business as usual, and it also then creating further opportunities for collaboration. And when we talk about collaboration and we start to move into Horizon 2, and where technology is taking us and the opportunities that's actually creating and we're starting to see, and so Eleanor, how do we use the technology and the data that all of these sensors and everything that are collecting? How can we use those to help us?
So thanks, Phil. I thought I'd talk about one example we did recently for steam usage on a pulp and paper site. So for those that don't know, steam is really used across a pulp and paper site in thousands of different locations. And historically, we would have always had to analyze this from an engineering point of view in terms of consumption. In a system by kind of system basis, because for those of you who will be familiar with Excel, if you tried to analyze that all at once in Excel, you would have gotten the lovely Excel wheel of death. It just isn't really possible to use those kind of simple tools when you've got that much data. But now we've got this ability to analyze data using quite simple tools which don't require those advanced database knowledge or programming skills like Power BI. So This is a dashboard here up on the screen that we developed using Power BI to analyze this data. And you can see that in real time, we're predicting the savings for the client of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And from a sustainability point of view, it's also the carbon used to generate that steam that we're optimizing. So we did this using, basic data analysis in Power BI, but you could even take this further. People are actively looking or actively using artificial intelligence or AI, and that can look for correlations, across the data and trends, giving answers and making connections that you can't when you're looking at it one bit at a time. So really, I think, my point around this is that fundamentally the application or the usefulness of data has really taken a step change in terms of what we can do with it.
Thanks, Eleanor, and that's really great to see. And again, those savings, the reduced carbon, and how technology is really making that happen for us, and great opportunities for more people to start thinking about that. And when we talk about more people, I start to think about more collaboration. And so, why does this is going to need more collaboration? And what's your view, and why do you think it's going to need more collaboration than normal?
Yeah, so Phil, I think if you want solid waste energy or wastewater to be optimized on a kind of more, national or global scale, outside people's existing site boundaries, you actually need to look for who could be your new partners in this journey. For example, if you take solid waste, historically, if you, at the moment, from a domestic point of view, you would take your rubbish and you would stick it in your bin. It would be collected by a local waste management company, and they would either take it off for disposal, or then maybe they might take it for further processing with another waste management company for recycling. But their boundaries are very much within the waste management sphere. But we've heard of package or supporting partnerships at the moment, which would be a waste management company and a food and beverage company, and they're joining together to invest in a plastic recycling factory that basically will take recycled plastic and turn it back into clean plastic so that we can reuse it in the food and beverage packaging. So for the advantages for the companies, the waste management company now gets a really consistent place that they can take their plastic for recycling, because obviously with global markets being quite disrupted, not just for COVID, but also with the recycling markets, this is really important for them to have a consistent place that they can take their plastic for recycling. And for the food and beverage company, they get a really good supply of recycled plastic for their packaging. It's really good for their brand. It's, a really great partnership that brings lots of positives on both sides. And I think those partnerships are really outside normal bounds, and are really, I guess, important that we deliver those partnerships in a different way and look outside where we have historically looked.
Okay, that's really good, and it's great to see that in trained carbon, it can be reused and reused without ending up in a waste pile and not helping us at all. And you did mention disruption to global trade, and there's been documentaries on TV, and there's been brands around the world that have seen their plastic waste stored in piles out dumped anywhere in these other countries, because it goes to the lowest. Who can get rid of it for me the lowest? So brands are starting to be aware that their plastic waste is starting to cause them issues. So global trade, we've seen not just from the waste side of it, but as you mentioned, COVID, and there's other factors now affecting global trade than we've seen for many years. And this is going to lead to greater opportunities for collaboration and working together to really accelerate that the sustainable future that we need. And so if we start to talk about Horizon 3, what are the possibilities when we start to bring the data and the opportunities that Eleanor spoke about together? And so Sarah, how could we use technology to really amplify our sustainability?
Yeah, Phil, so I think if we think about the concept of collaboration that Eleanor just talked about between two companies, but then we imagine if we had, say, 10 companies who are all physically located next to each other and exchanging resources like materials, water, energy, and byproducts. And that concept is actually known as an industrial ecosystem. So essentially it is the processes that occur in industry replicating what happens in nature. And there's huge benefits from doing this. You obviously increase your resource efficiency, there's huge economic gains that can be made, and also you promote circular economy in terms of the reuse of all of those materials. But in order for us to actually share these resources between companies, that's where technology comes in. So having an advanced database to actually capture the properties of these resources, and something like a digital twin to actually map out the flow of the resources to understand how they can be exchanged. And I think also the use of AI technology will be really valuable to pick up trends in the exchanges that do occur, and also to suggest connections between companies that you might not consider otherwise.
That's really great, and it sounds like there will be opportunity, and there is opportunity, and we should be taking advantage of that opportunity that's sitting in front of us. But with all those opportunities, there's obviously challenges. And so what do you think some of those are?
Yeah, you're right, Phil. It does sound really good in concept, but of course there are challenges to overcome. I'm just going to talk about two of those today. So the first is really the need to understand the properties of those resource streams before you could trade them between or share them between different companies. So, you know, we need to understand the composition, temperature, pressure, how much of that resource is available to share between two different companies. And there's actually this company in the Netherlands called Excess Materials Exchange. And the way that they've overcome this is by giving a material a waste passport when it has an identity or it's got enough information to be able to be shared. And you can sort of think about this as a digital matchmaking platform, or possibly also Tinder for waste. And the second challenge that we've really got is thinking about transport when these two companies exchanging materials aren't located in the same physical location. So we really need to understand the impact of cost and also carbon miles if we're transporting these materials when we exchange them over a long distance. And I think using advanced analytics or some sort of simulation of those logistical movements to optimize them could be really useful if we're integrating them into a database.
Well, that's really great, and it's great to see that we can head that way. And are we starting to see it? Have you seen trends, and have you seen opportunities and this happening overseas?
Yeah, we have, Phil. So I think probably the best example is the Kalundborg Eco Park, which is located in Denmark. And there's actually, if you check out the slide at the moment, that is showing the symbiotic network, which links about a dozen different industrial sites to create over 30 exchanges of water, energy, and material streams. And this is really centered around the biomass power plant. And so for these companies, the benefits are they've got reduced operating costs, they've got increased resource efficiency, and also they're reusing and recycling the wastes that one site is creating to basically create a more circular economy.
That's really good to hear, and great to see those companies getting together and making use of their waste streams and the technology that's really made that available and happen. So that's fantastic. So let's bring that back to a New Zealand context. And what do you think the opportunities for something like that in New Zealand are?
Yeah, I think there is quite a big opportunity for this in New Zealand. I think more and more we're going to be seeing industrial sites or factories which are currently located in what we'd now consider a suburban area where the value of that land is actually quite high and they're taking up quite a big physical space. And maybe it's better for them to be relocating out of that area into a more rural area. And so I think it's really a bit of a call to government around understanding the importance of allocating a particular dedicated area or zone for industrial development, but also providing some sort of financial incentive for companies or sites that are relocating to move into the zone where you could basically create an industrial eco park. So yeah, I think there's a lot to do in this space, but there is definitely an opportunity in New Zealand for this.
That's really fantastic, and wouldn't it be great that if we could actually use technology to get something like this happening in New Zealand? You know, we've been world leaders in a lot of things, and with the opportunity, I think, to actually take this and make it happen, it was just getting the right people around the table to have that conversation to create the opportunity. So I think a fantastic future. Look, thanks, Mo, Eleanor, and Sarah, for sharing the views that we've seen today. It's really been great to talk about it in the three horizons, to give it a bit of a picture about what's really happening now and becoming the business as usual, where things are going, and some of the opportunities and savings and sustainability that's creating in Horizon 2, and then Horizon 3. What are the real opportunities that a technology is going to help accelerate and amplify our sustainable future? So again, thank you for your views. Time for some Q&A. I think we've got some questions. Eleanor, I think I'll pose this question to you. There's one here. What do you think the balance will be in New Zealand between industries driving this themselves and government regulation?
Yeah, so Phil, I think it's an interesting question, and I don't know that there's the perfect answer out there yet, to disappoint the person who put the question in. But I think that it does require both parties, because you need government, you know, like when you look at eco parks overseas and where they've been quite successful, you do need government incentives in order to make sure that, you know, the land is allocated. You need the planning kind of legislative back there. Often these parks have got, you know, some kind of common utility that they're using. That sometimes is a government-led, you know, kind of function in it. But I do think that when you look at the collaboration piece, which I spoke of, there's also a bit where currently, you know, what goes to waste from a wastewater point of view, what is the composition of someone's waste, might be considered, you know, confidential to that client. So I also think there's a piece that, you know, companies out there will need to realize that that in order to do that collaboration, they will need to be more open with each other about what all those streams are, and they will require some sort of data sharing. So there's sort of a culture change there, I think, that also needs to happen for private companies.
Thanks, Eleanor. I think there's a question here for you, Mo, about IoT sensors, and that they've been around quite a few years and that they're now really affordable. So that's really great to hear and see that the audience also realises that, and so that's fantastic. But what do you think the limitation? I guess the question is, what are the limitations on the uptake at the moment, and how do people engage if they're interested in using these technologies?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So they have been, you know, getting a lot cheaper in price and obviously a bit more affordable as well. But to me, I think the biggest barrier is the lack of standards. So you get lots of vendors, you've got a really busy marketplace. It's really hard to decide which vendor to go with. And often organizations don't really want to invest a lot upfront in emerging technology without really seeing the benefits. There is ways to counteract that. So, you know, doing pilots, piloting multiple technologies, or going with vendor agnostic advice as such. But generally, I think over the last few years, the market has been a lot more mature, and there's real use cases now for IoT. For example, the smart water meters that I mentioned, or the industrial example as well.
Thanks, Mo. And I'm sure there's a lot of IoT sensors out there that are just waiting to be applied, and it'd be great to see audience starting to get them around their factories and sites and really understand the data that's available to help them amplify their business's sustainable future. Sarah, a question for you here. Somebody really thinks the vision of, I think they used the word love, the vision of the industrial ecosystems, yeah. But they're wondering how fragile they are if you've got the ecosystem and one factory closing, yeah, and what happens to all the other sites in that ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that is a really good question. And if we think about the Kallenborg Eco Park as a good example, overseas, when they've had a lot of success with these types of eco parks, often the backbone of the eco park itself is either a thermal generation plant or a wastewater plant. And I think if that particular factory was to shut down, that would have quite a flow-on effect to all the different industries around it. So I think as long as you've got, for example, the biomass power thermal plant, which they've got on Cullerborg, which is supplying steam to a few different industries, and then they're recovering the waste heat as well, and using that to optimize any heat rejected to the environment. I think as long as you've got that backbone component in terms of the thermal power plant, or maybe it's a wastewater treatment plant, that's sort of your critical element, and then the industries or the sites around that probably aren't as much of an issue in terms of ensuring you've got that flow.
So I've got a second question here, which is quite interesting around the eco parks, Sarah, and it's about emissions from the eco park. And if you've got this eco park and you do have some emissions,
yeah,
who owns the emissions?
Yeah, so I guess if you think about a carbon footprint and the way that you split that up, your scope 1 emissions is basically what the individual site owns itself and emits. So in the example of the Cullenborg Industrial Eco Park, the power generation plant, that would own all of the emissions associated with the generation of steam from biomass in their coal boiler, their biomass boiler. And then when a company receives that steam, then that basically would be their scope 2 emissions. So the purchasing of that steam or electricity or whatever it is that they're exchanging. So it would still come into consideration, but it would be defined as scope 2 rather than scope 1, because they don't physically own that asset.
Thanks. Question back for you, Mo, around there's a lot of IoT examples in New Zealand buildings, and so there's a couple of questions as part of this. So what are the limitations to the data, and what do people do, or how do they use the data?
Yeah, that's a really good...
To get the full benefits, sorry?
Yeah. I think, and I've definitely come across this before, I would say start with the dashboard, don't start with the sensor. So start by looking at what they actually want to see and work backwards to the sensor. We often get guilty of looking at the technology and thinking, well, this is pretty cool, I've got to use it. And you often get in that loop where you have got data, but you can't really match it with a business benefit as such, or there is a business benefit, but it's not really clear what it is. But if you start with your dashboard, what you actually want to see, and work backwards, that should definitely counteract the issue of data.
Great, thanks, Mo. Yeah, I imagine that there's data centers full of all this data that we don't really understand the value of. So it'd be a great, I think your view of understanding what is it you're trying to measure, where do you think you need to make improvements, and then gathering that specific data is a really good start. I think there's quite an interesting question here for you, Eleanor. There's one, somebody's asking, what sort of timeframes do you think we're going to be moving to, especially when you talk about relocating industrial processing plants? And do you think it's possible in the context of 2050?
I think that's a really good question. I think that there has always been a lot of pressure on land, and we've actually seen people, recently in the last few years already deciding that they're going to be relocating out of, say, the city centre or different more urban areas, so they can optimize the cost of their land and where they are. And like as Sarah talked about, we've seen that actually happening in the last few years. So I do think that it will increase. I don't think it's the sole answer to hit our 2050 emissions. I think there's actually obviously a lot of other work that also needs to happen. But I think that until we get a government-led policy around where these eco parks could be and what places we could collaborate on, that's almost like the first step that we need to take place. And beyond that, it will start to flow. I think if you put, the kind of opportunity there for industrial sites, more and more will start to move and move to that place. I heard a great analogy recently, which was around startups and the need for data access. And if you put in really high speed free Wi-Fi, startups come. And so I feel like it's sort of similar. You put some sort of backbone of energy or utility like Sarah talked about, and the companies will come and it will start to make a difference.
The old analogy, build it and they will come. But we're rapidly,
absolutely. Yeah.
we're rapidly running out of time, but quite interesting. There's somebody posed a question about what would the opportunity for something like the Eco Park at Tiwai Point be. So a great question. And a really topical discussion at the moment. And yes, I think we'll all be on board saying that there's a really interesting opportunity about what you could do with the Tiwai Point site, especially from an eco park side. And I guess it would be understanding the industries and how you could make something work in the context of what is already in Southland and what could be in Southland. And I think that could be in that challenge, which is really neat for all of us. So on that note, the challenge for us and the challenge for the audience is, how are we going to take technology to help amplify our sustainable future, and what is your part going to be in this? Thank you.